Tyler never suspected that his own mother, Sandra, and his best friend, Jason, were hiding a secret so twisted it would shatter his world and end in bloodshed. Tyler was 17 when everything in his world started to shift. For most of his teenage life, things had been stable, at least on the surface. He lived with his mom, Sandra, in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing major ever happened. Sandra was a nurse who often worked night shifts at the local hospital, doing her best to support them both after Tyler's father had left years ago. The two had formed a close bond, even if they didn't talk much about deep things. Tyler trusted her completely, and she trusted him just the same. Tyler's best friend, Jason, had been around for nearly a decade. They met in third grade and had been inseparable ever since. Jason was the kind of kid who blended easily into any environment, charming, smart, and just rebellious enough to be interesting. Over time, Sandra grew fond of him. She would joke that Jason was like her second son. It wasn't unusual for him to stay over during the weekends or even entire weeks during the summer. He was practically family, and Tyler never imagined that would change. That particular summer, Jason was over more than usual. He stayed late, sometimes even after Tyler had already gone to bed. Sandra never seemed to mind. In fact, she seemed to enjoy having him around. She'd make extra snacks, laugh a little louder than usual, and talk with Jason for long periods while Tyler was busy in another room. At first, Tyler saw it as a good thing. His two favorite people getting along, it was perfect. But soon, little things began to feel strange. Jason started acting different. He was distracted when they played video games, and he didn't joke around like he used to. He became more private, stepping outside to take calls or texting with his screen turned away. Tyler assumed it was about a girl. That made the most sense. Jason had always been popular, and there were always girls texting him. But then one night, Tyler happened to glance at Jason's phone screen. Just a flicker of text was visible. It was a message from a contact saved under a single letter S. The words were short but too intimate to ignore. It read, "Can't stop thinking about last night." Something about it sent a chill down Tyler's spine. He didn't ask questions though. He didn't want to look jealous or suspicious. Maybe it really was a girl Jason didn't want to talk about. Tyler pushed it out of his mind, convincing himself that it wasn't important. But that moment planted a seed of doubt that wouldn't stop growing. Sandra started acting differently too. She dressed up more, wore perfume she hadn't used in years, and started paying closer attention to her appearance even on days she wasn't working. Tyler noticed her checking her reflection in the mirror before Jason came over. Once, he even caught her looking at her phone and smiling just moments before Jason walked through the door. It was subtle at first, but the shift in dynamics grew. Jason started coming over even when Tyler wasn't home. Sometimes Tyler would walk in from the gym to find Jason already in the living room, casually chatting with Sandra. The strange part was how quickly they'd change the topic or stop talking altogether when Tyler entered. The air always felt heavy, like a conversation had just ended, one Tyler wasn't meant to hear. Late one night, Tyler went to get a glass of water. As he walked down the hall, he noticed light coming from under Sandra's bedroom door. He paused for a second and heard soft laughter. It wasn't just hers. Jason was in there. Tyler stood frozen. The clock read 1:47 a.m. He turned around, went back to his room, and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, neither of them acted like anything had happened. Jason left early, and Sandra hummed while making coffee, pretending everything was normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. Tyler began to pull back, spending more time out of the house, avoiding Jason's texts, and pretending not to notice the way Sandra looked at her phone when it buzzed. He kept telling himself that he was overthinking, that he was being paranoid. He didn't want to believe what his gut was trying to tell him. Then came the moment that shattered the illusion completely. Tyler needed to print out a school project and borrowed Sandra's laptop. Her email was still open. He wasn't trying to snoop, but curiosity got the better of him. He clicked on the inbox and froze. The subject lines were unmistakable. "Last night was amazing. I wish I could be with you all the time. And delete this after reading." The sender? Jason. Tyler's heart raced as he opened a few messages. The words were raw, emotional, and explicit. There was no mistaking the nature of their relationship. It wasn't a fling. It was a full-blown affair. They spoke about meeting in secret, lying to Tyler, and even fantasizing about being together without him in the way. Tyler felt sick. He closed the laptop, numb and in disbelief. His hands trembled as he sat there, trying to process what he had just read. He wanted to scream, to break something, to confront them both. But instead, he said nothing. Not that day, not the next. He carried the weight of betrayal in silence, observing everything with new eyes. Every laugh between them, every glance, every secret moment, they all made sense now. His mother and his best friend had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Tyler started planning his escape. He reached out to his dad, who had moved to another city years ago. They hadn't been close, but at that moment, Tyler needed distance. He needed a safe place, somewhere he could think clearly. His father agreed without asking too many questions. A week later, Tyler packed his bags, left a note on the kitchen counter, and walked out of the house that no longer felt like home. Sandra tried calling, but Tyler ignored her. Jason messaged, but Tyler didn't respond. The silence was his only weapon. He thought leaving would end the nightmare. But what he didn't know was that the real story was only beginning. The betrayal had only scratched the surface of something much darker, something no one would see coming. Tyler settled into his father's home, a modest apartment in a quieter part of the city, hoping distance would help him forget what he had discovered. The days felt heavy, each one blurring into the next. He stopped responding to friends, skipped social media, and ignored all messages from his mother and Jason. The silence became a refuge, a way to avoid facing the anger, confusion, and grief. But no matter how far he ran, the memory of those emails burned in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he pictured them together, his mother and his best friend laughing behind his back. His father didn't ask too many questions. He gave Tyler space, only occasionally checking in to make sure he was eating or sleeping. Tyler appreciated the quiet understanding. He wasn't ready to explain the full story, not yet. He told his father it was personal and about trust being broken, and that was enough for now. Still, the unanswered questions lingered. Why had Jason done it? Why had his mother allowed it to happen under her own roof? Was it just a moment of weakness or something more twisted? One afternoon, Tyler opened his laptop to check his school assignments. He tried to focus, but a notification popped up, an unread email from Sandra. The subject line read, "Please read this." Against his better judgment, he opened it. The message was long, emotional, filled with apologies and explanations. She admitted to the affair, saying it started innocently, that she was lonely and didn't know how to stop once it began. She swore she still loved Tyler and begged him not to hate her. She claimed Jason manipulated her, that she never meant for it to go so far. She ended the message by saying she hadn't heard from Jason in days and was beginning to get worried. That last part caught Tyler off guard. As angry as he was, he hadn't wished harm on Jason. He figured Jason was probably hiding from the fallout, ashamed or scared. But the fact that even Sandra hadn't heard from him now added a new layer of concern. Tyler tried to push it aside, but the thought stayed with him. What if something had happened? What if the guilt had gotten to Jason? 2 more days passed, and Jason still didn't respond to any calls or messages from anyone. Tyler finally reached out to one of their mutual friends, hoping to get some news. The friend hadn't seen Jason either and said his mom had reported him missing the day before. His car was still parked in front of his apartment, but no one had seen him in nearly a week. Now the police were involved, and suddenly the affair wasn't the biggest problem anymore. The news hit Tyler harder than he expected. Jason had betrayed him in the worst way possible, but the idea of him simply vanishing without a trace stirred something else, fear. Tyler tried to focus on facts. Jason was impulsive, emotional, and often acted without thinking. Maybe he had run off to escape the shame. Maybe he needed time alone. But the more Tyler thought about it, the more the timeline began to disturb him. Jason's last known activity had been a text to Sandra. No one else had heard from him since. Tyler checked back on the email from his mother. She had mentioned Jason stopped responding after she told him it had to end. She said he had become obsessive, sending messages at all hours, begging to see her again. She described how he showed up outside the house uninvited and had even followed her to work once. Sandra said she warned him she'd call the police if it continued. According to her, the last time they spoke, she told him to never contact her again. It was difficult for Tyler to know what to believe. He had seen how easily Sandra had kept secrets. He had seen how Jason had lied to his face for months. Either one of them could have twisted the truth. But now one of them was gone, and the story no longer felt like a messy betrayal, it felt like something criminal. A few days later, Tyler was contacted by a police officer. They wanted to speak with him about Jason's disappearance. He agreed and gave a detailed statement about what he had found, how he discovered the affair, and how he had left his mother's home shortly after. He shared what he knew from the emails and the timeline he had pieced together. He didn't hold anything back. The officer listened carefully and thanked him for his honesty. The following week, Sandra's home became the center of the investigation. Police arrived with search warrants, looking for any clues about Jason's last known whereabouts. Neighbors watched from their porches as officers combed through her house, the garage, and even the backyard. News vans began showing up, and whispers spread across the neighborhood. The story was no longer just a scandal, it was a mystery. Sandra was brought in for questioning. She maintained her innocence, insisting she hadn't seen Jason since the night she ended things. She said he had taken the breakup badly and sent her disturbing messages, but she never imagined he would disappear. She denied harming him and cooperated with the investigation, but her name was already making headlines. Meanwhile, Tyler's emotions spiraled in all directions. Part of him still couldn't believe things had gone so far. Just months ago, Jason had been like a brother. They had shared everything, laughs, secrets, even dreams for the future. And his mother, the one person he thought he could rely on after his father left, had turned his world upside down. Now, that twisted connection between them was at the heart of a potential crime. As more days passed without any sign of Jason, police began to consider foul play. The fact that he left behind his phone, wallet, and car didn't point to someone trying to disappear. Tyler's mind ran wild with theories. Had Jason taken his own life out of guilt? Had Sandra snapped during an argument? Or had someone else found out about the affair and taken matters into their own hands? Tyler didn't know what to believe anymore. His home, his friendships, and even his understanding of right and wrong had all been corrupted by one secret. And now, with Jason missing, the lines between betrayal, obsession, and violence were beginning to blur in ways no one had expected. The official search for Jason intensified as the days dragged on. Flyers with his face began appearing around town on telephone poles, outside grocery stores, and on the windows of convenience shops. His disappearance had turned from a private matter into a full-blown public mystery. Police released a statement to the media asking for tips and leads, but nothing concrete came in. Jason had simply vanished without leaving a trace. No transactions on his bank account, no surveillance footage of him leaving the neighborhood, no calls or texts since the night Sandra said she ended things with him. He had disappeared into thin air. The small town buzzed with speculation. Everyone had a theory. Some believed Jason had run off to avoid scandal. Others whispered darker ideas that he had been silenced by someone who didn't want the affair to come out. People pointed fingers at Sandra, at Tyler, and even at Jason's own family. Gossip spread like wildfire, and everywhere Tyler went, eyes followed him. He had hoped moving in with his dad would give him peace, but now the drama had followed him across town. Then came a breakthrough, or what seemed like one. A woman reported hearing a loud argument behind her home the night Jason went missing. Her house was only a few streets away from Sandra's. She remembered hearing a man's voice shouting, followed by what she thought was a car door slamming and tires screeching. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, but now it felt relevant. Police took her statement seriously and began looking for security footage from homes in the area. Meanwhile, Sandra's behavior came under more intense scrutiny. Investigators discovered that in the days following Jason's disappearance, she had made several online purchases: cleaning supplies, gloves, garbage bags, and a large plastic tarp. The receipts were time-stamped just hours after Jason had last been seen. The timing raised red flags. When questioned, Sandra claimed she was preparing to do a deep cleaning of the garage, something she had been putting off for months. But the coincidence couldn't be ignored. Police returned to her house for a second search. This time, they brought forensic specialists. They combed through the garage and backyard with cadaver dogs. It was in a narrow side area behind the shed where they found something troubling: a patch of dirt that had been recently disturbed, the grass above it dead and uneven. They began digging. What they found was not a body, but burned remains of clothing, scraps of what looked like a bedsheet, and a partially melted phone case. When tested, the fabric came back with traces of blood, human blood. DNA analysis confirmed what they feared. The blood belonged to Jason. This discovery shifted the investigation from a missing person case to a homicide. Sandra was brought in for further questioning. She remained calm but visibly shaken. Faced with the evidence, she denied everything again, saying she had no idea how Jason's blood ended up in her yard. She claimed someone must have planted it. She suggested Jason might have hurt himself and that the discovery proved nothing. Investigators pressed harder, asking about the burned clothing, the tarp, and the suspicious purchases. Sandra had no clear answers. Tyler was devastated when he learned about the findings. He sat in silence as officers explained what they had uncovered. Part of him had still clung to the idea that Jason had just left, that the whole affair would fade into something they'd all eventually forget. But now, the reality hit harder than ever. Jason wasn't coming back, and someone, possibly his own mother, might have killed him. Detectives began reconstructing a possible sequence of events. They believed Jason had come to the house the night of his disappearance, possibly to confront Sandra after being rejected. An argument likely erupted, one that turned violent. Whether it was premeditated or impulsive remained unclear, but the evidence suggested that something had happened in or near the house. The cleanup, buying supplies, burning clothes, digging in the yard seemed methodical, too methodical. Still, they had no body, no murder weapon, and no confession. The case was strong, but not airtight. Sandra's lawyer argued there was no proof of death, only assumptions. Without Jason's remains, they could not determine how he died or who was responsible. But the court of public opinion had already made its decision. Sandra became the most hated woman in town. Protesters stood outside her house. Social media exploded with speculation, photos, and threats. She was forced to take leave from her job at the hospital, and no one in her neighborhood spoke to her. As the case built up, Tyler struggled with conflicting emotions. He was angry, heartbroken, and exhausted. But more than anything, he was confused. He didn't know what to believe anymore. He had seen his mother as a victim, at times vulnerable, manipulated by Jason's charm. But now the narrative had flipped. If she was guilty, then she had not only betrayed his trust but also taken a life. His best friend's life. The boy who had eaten at their dinner table, celebrated birthdays with him, and shared every part of his childhood. Tyler began writing everything he remembered. Every strange glance, every late-night whisper, every unusual moment he had overlooked. He gave it all to the police. He hoped that something he said might help them put the puzzle together. He wanted closure, but he also wanted justice. Then, a hiker in a rural area about 20 miles outside of town stumbled upon something horrifying. It was a body, partially decomposed and covered with branches. Forensic analysis confirmed the worst. It was Jason. His cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, followed by strangulation. Duct tape was found near the scene, the same kind that had been found in Sandra's garage. The timeline matched. The investigators now had a body, a cause of death, and enough circumstantial evidence to move forward. Sandra was arrested at her home without incident. The charges: second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and destruction of evidence. Tyler watched the news footage of her being led away in handcuffs, her face expressionless, her head slightly lowered. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stared at the screen as the weight of everything that had happened settled in his chest like a stone. His mother was going to stand trial for the murder of his best friend, and he was the key witness. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the front rows, their notepads ready, their cameras waiting for the shot that would accompany the next headline. Outside, protesters gathered, holding signs with phrases like "Justice for Jason" and "Monster in Disguise." Inside, the atmosphere was tense, thick with anticipation. The trial of Sandra Holloway had become one of the most talked about cases the town had ever seen. The details: an affair with her son's best friend, a suspicious disappearance, and a body found in the woods had gripped the community in a way few stories ever had. Sandra sat quietly at the defense table, her appearance drastically different from the confident woman Tyler once knew. She looked thinner, her hair pulled back tightly, her face pale. She rarely glanced toward the gallery where Tyler sat, but when she did, her eyes lingered for just a moment before drifting away. Tyler didn't return the look. His expression remained blank. He had spent weeks preparing to testify, but no amount of preparation could have steeled him for this moment. He wasn't just a witness. He was a son caught in the center of a horrifying story. The prosecution opened with a clear strategy: establish motive, opportunity, and premeditation. They painted a picture of a woman who had become obsessed with a much younger man, one who was also her son's closest friend. When the relationship soured and Jason threatened to expose the affair, Sandra allegedly silenced him to protect herself. They introduced text messages recovered from Jason's phone: desperate pleas to meet, accusations of betrayal, and most damning of all, a message that read, "If you tell anyone, you'll regret it." They then presented the forensic evidence: the traces of Jason's blood in Sandra's yard, the burned fabric, the tarp, the duct tape, and finally the discovery of Jason's body with wounds consistent with being struck with a blunt object and strangled. Though no murder weapon had been found, the autopsy revealed injuries consistent with a heavy household item, such as a metal lamp or fireplace tool. Sandra's defense tried to build a counter-narrative. They admitted the affair but insisted Jason had become unstable and obsessive. They claimed Sandra ended the relationship, and Jason's disappearance had nothing to do with her. They pointed to the lack of eyewitnesses and the absence of a murder weapon as signs of a weak case. They suggested someone else could have had a motive to hurt Jason, perhaps a jealous ex, perhaps someone who learned about the affair and wanted revenge. But none of those possibilities had any supporting evidence. When it came time for Tyler to testify, the courtroom went completely silent. He walked to the witness stand with steady steps, but his hands trembled slightly as he took the oath. The prosecutor began by asking him to recall the summer when everything began to unravel. Tyler described how close he and Jason had been, how often he stayed at their house, and how he slowly began to notice changes in both Jason and his mother. He detailed the night he accidentally saw the message on Jason's phone, the strange behaviors, the private conversations, and the growing tension. He spoke about discovering the emails, the emotional collapse he felt, and the decision to leave his mother's home. His voice remained firm, but every word felt like tearing open an old wound. When he described the betrayal, the audience could feel the weight of his pain. Then came the most crucial part: his explanation of the timeline. Tyler testified that he had seen Jason the day before he disappeared. They hadn't spoken, but he remembered the look on Jason's face: tense, distracted, as if something heavy was on his mind. He told the jury about Sandra's email afterward, how she said Jason had become aggressive, and how that claim felt more like a cover story than the truth. His final words before stepping down echoed across the courtroom: "He was my best friend, and she knew that. She knew, and she still did what she did." The defense tried to discredit Tyler by pointing out his emotional state, suggesting that his testimony was fueled by anger and betrayal rather than facts. But Tyler had been careful. He stuck to what he knew, what he saw, and what he read. His calm demeanor under pressure made a strong impression on the jury. As the trial continued, more witnesses were called. Jason's mother testified, her voice breaking as she spoke of her son's disappearance and how she never suspected anything was wrong. She revealed that Jason had confided in her just days before he vanished, saying he was ending something complicated and painful. He hadn't mentioned names, but he had said he feared someone might lose control. Expert witnesses discussed the forensic details, explaining how the blood evidence linked directly to Sandra's home and how attempts had been made to clean the scene. A fire pit in the backyard had remnants of burned fabric and personal items. Though Sandra claimed they were from an old garage cleanup, the timeline and the DNA made it clear the items were tied to Jason. The trial dragged on for weeks, but the momentum remained on the prosecution's side. Each new piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. Sandra's defense weakened with every passing day. She never took the stand in her own defense, and her silence became another question in the minds of the jurors. When it finally came time for closing arguments, the prosecution didn't hold back. They reminded the jury of the betrayal at the heart of the story. A mother had not only crossed a moral line with her son's best friend but had then killed him to keep it hidden. They called it a crime of desperation and selfishness, one rooted in secrecy and shame. The defense tried to cast doubt, suggesting that without a murder weapon or direct witness, they couldn't be certain of what had happened. But the jury had heard enough. After deliberating for only a few hours, they returned with a verdict: guilty. Sandra Holloway was convicted of second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and destruction of evidence. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. As the judge read the sentence, Sandra showed no visible reaction. She simply stared ahead, her face blank, her fate sealed. Tyler sat in the back of the courtroom, numb. The trial was over, the verdict delivered, but the damage was irreversible. He had lost his best friend to murder and his mother to a crime that should have never happened. Nothing would ever feel normal again. The truth had come out, but it hadn't brought peace. Only silence. A deep, endless silence that followed him out of the courtroom and into the rest of his life. In the weeks following the trial, the media attention slowly began to fade. The cameras left, the headlines shifted to new scandals, and the town that had once been the center of a national story returned to a strange version of normal. But for Tyler, there was no return, no reset button, no clean slate. The sentence had been handed down, the courtroom doors had closed, and life outside the courthouse felt quieter, but only on the surface. Inside, everything remained fractured. He stayed at his father's place, finishing high school quietly, avoiding attention whenever possible. Most people knew who he was, even if they didn't say it out loud. They whispered in halls, stared just a little too long, and lowered their voices when he walked by. He learned to live in that silence, to navigate the stares, and to ignore the curiosity that clung to him like fog. People wanted to know how he was doing, but no one ever really asked. Maybe they were afraid of the answer. Each morning, Tyler woke up and faced the same reality. His best friend was gone, and his mother was behind bars for it. He tried to process what it all meant, but grief and betrayal didn't come with rules. Some days he felt numb, detached from everything. Other days, anger rose in waves he couldn't control. Sometimes it was directed at Sandra, other times at Jason, and occasionally, at himself for not seeing it sooner, for not stopping it. He would sit alone at night, replaying every moment he could remember. The long hours he and Jason spent talking about college, football, and life. The quiet mornings with Sandra, laughing over burnt toast and bad coffee. Every memory now twisted, stained by what came after. He found himself questioning the past. Had Jason ever really been his friend? Had Sandra ever truly cared about protecting him? Or were they just using him as a cover for their lies? Tyler didn't speak to Sandra after the verdict. She wrote him letters from prison, long ones filled with apologies, explanations, and desperate promises that she still loved him. He read the first one and never opened another. He kept them all in a showbox, hidden in the back of his closet, unsure if he'd ever be ready to read them again. He didn't want to hear her reasons. He didn't want to know why she did it. No reason would ever be good enough. One day, while walking home from school, he passed the house he once called home. It stood empty, the lawn overgrown, the windows dark. A for sale sign leaned against the mailbox, weathered and crooked. The sight of it brought back a rush of memories. Jason's bike leaning on the porch, Sandra watering the front garden, the sound of laughter from the open windows. It had all seemed so normal back then. He stood there for a long time, watching the stillness of the place that had held so many secrets. Eventually, Tyler began speaking to a counselor. His father insisted, and though Tyler resisted at first, he finally agreed. The sessions were quiet at first. He didn't say much, just sat with his arms crossed while the counselor gently asked questions. But over time, the words began to come. He talked about the betrayal, the confusion, the way his world had been ripped apart by people he trusted. The counselor never pushed too hard. She let Tyler speak in fragments, in scattered pieces that slowly formed something whole. One breakthrough came when Tyler admitted he didn't just miss Jason, he hated him. And that hate made him feel guilty. He hated that Jason had lied, that he had betrayed their friendship, and that he had put Sandra in a position that spiraled into tragedy. But at the same time, Tyler missed the friend he used to know, the boy who stood by him through hard times, who made him laugh when he was down. Reconciling those two versions of Jason was impossible. The counselor told him that it was okay to feel both things, that grief was never clean, that anger and sadness could exist side by side. It didn't mean he had to forgive either of them. It just meant he had to live with it. As graduation approached, Tyler considered not attending. He didn't want to stand in a crowded gym while people stared, applauded out of pity, or whispered behind his back. But his father encouraged him to go, reminding him that he had survived something most people couldn't even imagine, that he deserved to stand on that stage and claim his moment. So, Tyler went. He wore his cap and gown. He walked across the stage. The applause was brief, respectful. No cheers, no whistles, just polite clapping. He kept his head down, took his diploma, and left as soon as it was over. There were no parties afterward, no photos with friends, just a quiet dinner with his dad, where they didn't talk about the past or the future. Just the food in front of them, the silence between them, and the knowledge that they had made it through something they hadn't chosen. Summer came and went, and Tyler began preparing for college. He chose a school far from town, somewhere with no connections to his past. He wanted a place where no one knew his name, where he could build a new life without the shadow of what had happened. His father helped him pack. On the day he left, he hugged his dad longer than he ever had before. It was a quiet goodbye, with no promises, just mutual understanding. As the car pulled away, Tyler looked out the window, watching the town shrink behind him. He thought of Jason, of Sandra, of the boy he used to be before it all fell apart. He knew the road ahead would be long. The pain would never fully go away. But he was ready to start over, not to forget, but to move forward. In the end, Tyler didn't find closure in a courtroom or a sentence. He found it in surviving, in choosing to keep going, in living with the truth, no matter how ugly it was. Because sometimes survival is the only justice left.